Most people do not stay broke because they are lazy. They stay broke because they live on default settings. That is the truth. And default settings are dangerous because they do not feel like decisions. They feel like life. The paycheck arrives, the bills come out, the card gets swiped, the subscriptions renew, the rent gets paid, the little pleasures get justified, the debt gets carried, the retirement plan stays untouched. The future gets whatever is left, which is usually nothing. Then the month ends, and the whole thing begins again. That is what most people call normal. I call it surrender. I do not mean moral surrender. I mean financial surrender. The quiet habit of letting every institution in modern life write instructions for your money before you ever do. If you do not understand that point, then you will spend years blaming your income for a system problem. I have spent enough of my life around money to know this with great confidence. Income matters. Yes. Opportunity matters. Yes. Luck matters more than people like to admit. Yes, but there is a deeper reality underneath all of that. Money goes where the system sends it. If your system is built by default, then default gets the money. And default is not interested in your freedom. Default wants your paycheck. Default wants your debt. Default wants your monthly fees. Default wants your attention. Default wants your weak moments. Default wants you tired. Default wants you slightly behind. Default wants you saying, I guess this is just how life is. I have no use for that sentence because life is expensive enough already. You do not need to make it worse by letting the settings remain unchanged. I would rather say this plainly. We are living in an automatic economy, and if you do not build an automatic wealth system of your own, then the economy will build an automatic extraction system around you. That is not dramatic language. That is a description of what is already happening. Money leaves accounts automatically. Now, subscriptions draft automatically, payroll taxes happen automatically, interest compounds automatically, minimum payments happen automatically, lifestyle drift happens automatically, advertising enters your mind automatically. The card number is remembered automatically. The checkout is frictionless automatically. The future gets sold automatically. The remarkable thing is not that people are broke. The remarkable thing is that anyone escapes this machinery without building another machine strong enough to push back. That is the real work. Not motivation, not inspiration. A machine that pays you first. A machine that builds ownership. A machine that protects you from your moods. A machine that separates safety from dreams from long-term wealth. A machine that keeps the future from being treated like a spare room everyone else can rent. That is how I think about it. People often ask me where wealth begins. They expect me to say stock picking, real estate, business, or leverage. All of those can matter. But wealth really begins one step earlier than that. It begins when you stop living by financial default. Because once you stop living by default, an extraordinary thing happens. The same paycheck that used to vanish starts to behave differently. It starts obeying. It starts getting assigned. It starts building rather than merely disappearing. That is the first turning point. And yet most people never reach it because they misunderstand the nature of their own problem. They think they need more money first. They think the better salary will save them. They think if they can just get the next raise, the next job, the next lucky break, then everything will feel different. Sometimes more income helps. Of course it does. But I have watched too many people make more and stay stuck. Why? Because default scales beautifully. A person making $50,000 on default can feel trapped. A person making $100,000 on default can feel trapped in a nicer kitchen. More income with the same settings usually just funds a more expensive version of normal. That is not wealth. That is drift with upgrades. I dislike drift. That is why I have always believed a person should decide very early that some portion of every dollar is not available to the rest of life. It belongs to the future before the present gets a vote. I taught this as paying yourself first, and I still think it is one of the few ideas simple enough to survive contact with real life. 1 hour a day. About 12.5% of income paid to future you first. Automatically, when people hear that, they often say it sounds impossible. Good. Many important changes sound impossible before they become normal. The trick is not the number itself. The trick is the sequence. If the money lands in checking and waits there, life will negotiate with it, rent will want it, convenience will want it, fatigue will want it, Amazon will want it, stress will want it, the card bill will want it, friends will want it, a sale will want it, your weaker self will want it, and your future, as always, will get leftovers. Leftovers do not create freedom. That is why the money must move before the day begins arguing with you. That is why payroll deductions matter. That is why automatic retirement contributions matter. That is why a Roth IRA linked to your checking account matters. That is why machines matter more than moods. I trust machines, not because humans are weak, because humans are human. You are tired. You get stressed. You rationalize. You have a rough week. You feel entitled to relief. You tell yourself you will get serious next month. You tell yourself this one purchase is not the problem. You tell yourself the subscription is small. You tell yourself the card will be paid next cycle. You tell yourself you deserve to breathe. And meanwhile, the default machine keeps collecting. That is why I want your machine active before your emotions wake up. Now let me say something people do not always like hearing. There are still only a few escalators to wealth in America. Ownership of business, ownership of broad markets, ownership of real estate, used sensibly. Ownership in general, that is the part people resist because it sounds unfair. I understand the resistance. It is unfair, and it is still true. You can labor forever. Labor alone rarely makes you wealthy. It keeps you alive. Ownership is what lets time and rules start helping you. The tax code knows this. The retirement system knows this. The market knows this. Employers know this. The system is constantly revealing its preferences if you are willing to read them. Tax, advantaged accounts reward ownership. Employer matches reward ownership. Long-term gains treatment rewards ownership. Real estate equity rewards ownership. Rent by itself usually does not. Consumer life by itself does not. Being a very loyal spender does not. The system is always trying to tell you something. Own more, consume less. Automate both. That is the message. And once you hear it, a great many bad decisions start to look absurd. The most obvious one is using youth as an excuse for financial theater. Young people are told to take risk, which is fine. But they hear that phrase and turn it into nonsense. They buy whatever social media is shouting about. They chase quick wins. They experiment with things they do not understand. They confuse speculation with courage. Then they get burned and decide investing is fake. Number, they were fake. The market was not the problem. The behavior was. If you are young, your advantage is not brilliance. It is years that can turn tiny daily decisions into giant outcomes. Years that let boring investing look magical in hindsight. Years that allow ordinary contributions to become extraordinary balances. Your source material makes this point with a number that should wake anyone up. $27.40 a day. That is not a grand fortune. It is an ordinary amount of daily discipline over decades, invested consistently. It can become millions. Not because the world is generous, because time is Fay Philesite, Fay turn 26, file 0 Fay. That is why I would rather see a young person own broad index funds than chase glamour. Own the market, use a target. Date fund if it keeps things simple. Let the machine build, let boredom become your ally, let time do the lifting. This is also why I admire parents who teach children the word owner early. Consumer, employee, owner. That progression matters. If a child only learns the first two, the whole world gets framed incorrectly. Restaurants are just food. Companies are just employers. The stock market is just abstract noise. But the moment a young person understands that a stock symbol means ownership in a real business, the mind changes. The world starts dividing differently. That division matters more than people realize because identity drives long-term behavior. Fay Philesite, Fay turn 27, file 9 Fay. Now let us talk about the other side of the struggle, because not everyone listening is deciding between a Roth IRA and a 401k. Some people are just trying to get out from under debt. They have cards, balances, minimums, statements that feel like accusations, a life held together by timing and shame. And here is the first thing I would tell them: you do not have to be debt-free to feel relief. You only have to stop drifting. That is one of the most hopeful truths in personal finance. The body begins to calm down as soon as the fog begins to lift. You may still owe money, you may still be behind. But once there is a real plan, the feeling changes. Your source material says exactly this. People start to feel better when they begin the process. Not only when the balance hits zero. Fay Philesite, Fay turn 27, file 2 Fay, that matters enormously because shame keeps people passive. They think they must first become clean, perfect, and fully recovered before hope is allowed. Number hope enters when action starts. And action should begin with organization. Every card, every rate, every minimum, every due date, everything on paper, everything visible, no fog, no rough guesses, no pretending. This is where people want complexity, and I do not. I want momentum. Your source material uses dope, done on last payment. That is a phrase I like because it frames debt the right way, not as something to manage forever, but as something to finish. The suggested method is to start with the smallest balance. The mathematician in the room may complain. I understand the math argument for the highest rate first approach. I also understand real households. Real households benefit from momentum. Real households benefit from killing live traps one by one. Real households benefit from fewer due dates, fewer open cards, fewer opportunities for error and shame. That is why the small balance first method works so often. It reduces friction and builds evidence. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 7 Fay, and store cards are poison. Let me say that clearly. A 10% discount is not a win if it introduces a 25% habit. The discount is bait. The interest is the real business. Do not become somebody else's recurring revenue because they offered you a momentary price break and a little flattery at checkout. That is the entire trap. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 7 Fay Turn 27, File 2 Fay while debt is being attacked. Something else must happen too. A security account, not an account for fantasy, not an account for mood, an account for survival, cash, liquid, boring, protected from your impulses. This matters because life will interrupt you. Cars break, teeth crack, kids get sick, jobs wobble, pipes leak if there is no buffer. The same emergency that should have been a nuisance becomes a fresh trip back into the trap. A security account keeps the debt war from being restarted by one ugly surprise. Your reference material suggests a money market account used just for this purpose, and I think that is exactly the kind of friction and clarity people need. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 3 Fay, then comes the dream account. I like that structure because most people mix dreams, emergencies, and retirement into one emotional puddle. That is how confusion happens. Security money should not have the same job as dream money. Dream money should not have the same job as retirement money. Time horizon must decide behavior. If the dream is close, keep it safe. If it is years away, invest more aggressively. This is one of those plain truths that people ignore because it is simple. The simple truths are often the ones worth obeying. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 0 Fay Turn 27, File 9. Fay, what I admire about this framework is that it replaces default with purpose security. Dreams, retirement. 3 separate futures, 3 separate jobs, 3 separate streams. That is how serious people think. Now let me say something about homes. A first home is not a dream. It is an entry point. That sentence alone would rescue many people if they really believed it. The first home is often awkward, smaller, uglier, less polished, less prestigious, and less emotionally satisfying than the fantasy. That is fine. Wealth often begins with footholds, not dreamscapes. People wreck themselves trying to start at the final version. They want the forever house first. Money is not built that way. Money is built one sensible step at a time. Own what you can manage. Let equity and time do some work. Move later if life and math allow. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 0 Fay. This is one of the deepest misunderstandings in personal finance. People think if the first step does not look glamorous, it is not the right step. Often the opposite is true. A life built sensibly rarely looks thrilling at the beginning. It looks solid. I trust solid. Now I want to speak directly to people in their 50s who think they missed all of this. I understand the fear, but I do not accept the fatalism. Starting late is not the same as being finished. $20 a day still matters. $40 between 2 people still matters. Even in the 50s, the machine can still be turned on. The problem is not that time is gone. The problem is that many people use the lost years to justify losing more years. I want no part of that logic. Fay Filicite, Fay Turn 27, File 0 Fay. And if you are married or will ever be married, then financial knowledge must not live only in one head. That is negligence disguised as convenience, accounts, passwords, wills, insurance, debt, old retirement plans, beneficiaries. The whole picture should be known by both adults. Widowhood, illness, divorce, and grief are painful enough without adding financial blindness to the crisis. Your source material is very good on this point, and I want to underline it. Ignorance inside a household is not innocence. It is exposure. Fe Felicite Fadern 27 File 0 Fe. Now let me pull all this together. What keeps most people stuck is not one villain. It is default spending, default debt, default subscriptions, default fear, default passivity, default excuses, default identity, as consumer first, worker second, owner never. And the way out is not motivational intensity. It is replacement. Replace the no plan with a real one. Replace default extraction with default ownership. Replace automatic bills with automatic investing. Replace store card behavior with asset behavior. Replace shame with facts. Replace drift with assigned jobs. Replace financial childhood with adult machinery. That is the fight. And if you ask me what I would tell the ordinary person who feels left behind, it is this. You do not need a miracle. You need a machine. You need a 401k. If you have one, a Roth IRA if you do not, a target date fund if simplicity keeps you consistent, a security account, a dream account, a debt destruction plan, a refusal to let the future get only the scraps, a willingness to start at 1% if 1% is all you can bear, a willingness to raise it again, a willingness to be boring, a willingness to become the kind of person whose money moves on purpose. That kind of person becomes hard to corner. And that, to me, is what wealth is really for. Not to impress, not to decorate life with symbols, but to stop living cornered, to stop giving every institution first claim on your labor, to stop being surprised by your own paycheck disappearing, to stop believing that because 7 out of 10 are being left behind, you must be one of the 7 forever. You do not. But you do need to stop living on default. That is the opening, that is the change, that is the difference between hoping and building. And over a long enough life, it is the difference between always wondering where the money went and finally knowing exactly where it is going and why. There is one more reason default settings are so dangerous, and it has nothing to do with spreadsheets. Default settings change what a person believes is possible. A person living on default stops taking certain opportunities because the margin is gone. He does not leave the bad job because the bills are lined up too tightly. He does not start the side business because every month is already spoken for. He does not move to the better city because default has made relocation feel impossible. He does not take the class, ask for the raise, negotiate harder, or recover from a mistake with much confidence because the whole structure of life feels too brittle to absorb shock. That is what financial default really steals, not just dollars range. It narrows the range of decisions a person feels permitted to make. I have always thought the great purpose of money was not display. It was range of movement, range of refusal, range of recovery, range of ambition. A person with financial range can survive being wrong once in a while. A person without range must be right constantly. And that is no way to build a life. That is why the security account matters so much. That is why the automatic investment matters so much. That is why killing debt matters so much. That is why ownership matters so much. These are not abstract personal finance hobbies. They are the pieces that widen range, and range changes character. A household with no range becomes reactive. A household with some range becomes calmer. A household with real range becomes strategic. That difference can show up in a marriage, in parenting, in work, and even in health. It is hard to make clear decisions when every decision feels as if it could trigger financial damage. It is hard to be generous when you are scared. It is hard to invest for the future when the present is permanently in emergency mode. It is hard to dream clearly when the machine around you has already assigned every dollar to survival. Convenience and repair. That is why I refuse to talk about money as though it were only math. Math is the skeleton, life is the body around it, and if the body is always tense, the skeleton never gets to do its best work. So no, I do not think the goal is simply to become someone who saves more. The goal is to become someone whose financial life is no longer built on accidental obedience. That is a much stronger identity. Accidental obedience says yes to every default. Intentional living rewrites them. Accidental obedience says the card will be there if I need it. Intentional living says the reserve will be there instead. Accidental obedience says I will invest later when I feel ready. Intentional living says the transfer happens first and my feelings can catch up later. Accidental obedience says the debt is being handled because minimums are being made. Intentional living says the debt is under attack until it is gone. Accidental obedience says everyone is stressed, so this must be normal. Intentional living says normal is not the same as acceptable. That is the difference between being managed and managing. And if more people understood that the whole mood of their financial life would change, they would stop waiting for confidence and start building proof. They would stop asking whether they can perfectly afford the dream and start buying footholds. They would stop treating every setback as personal failure and start treating it as a system flaw to correct. They would stop thinking of their paycheck as money to be spent and start thinking of it as a stream to be divided with purpose. That is how strong households are built. Not by intensity alone, by redesign. Redesign the default, and life begins to feel different even before the balances look dramatic. The stress drops, the fog lifts, the small wins accumulate. The future stops being a vague concept and starts receiving cash on schedule. That is what I want for people. Not motivational noise, not a temporary challenge, a redesigned life, because once the design changes, wealth has somewhere to go. And when wealth has somewhere to go, it usually begins showing up much faster than people expect.